after thinking a little bit more of these readings during the break, of course, the word glory or glorious, even in the introduction, seems to sum them up. But at the same time, I have to say strange, and I'm not sure which one is going to win the fight there, strange or glorious. But let's go with glory first. And we have this story from the book of Genesis, chapter 15. This is the beginning of the faith of the Jews. This is the beginning. It started not with Adam, it started with Abraham. And we call him, throughout the scriptures, our father in faith. And it's really quite strange, but amazing what takes place here. It's hard to appreciate it on one level for me because, of course, the Jewish people always believed this with a deep faith. If you ever saw God face to face, as they would put it, you would die. Not that he would kill you, but you would die because he's too great, he's too awesome, he's too much. It's kind of like, I think, looking at the sun with the naked eye, no protective glasses or through a box, when you see, but to look straight up at the sun and stare at it, you'll damage your eye. It's not because the sun has an intention to do it, but because it's too bright, it's too strong. And so, this is an odd story on one level, that God goes and fetches Abraham, and he takes him out to this place where he shows him the land to tell him that he's going to possess this land, and all of his inheritors in the years to come, for ages to come, would then have that land. And he has a conversation with God. And again, for me, I'm 75, and I've never had a conversation where I heard a voice speak back to me. If I did, I think I'd wet my pants or something. I don't think I could handle it. But here, Abraham and God are just speaking like they're sitting around a coffee table having some donuts and coffee or something. They're back and forth, this conversation. And then God leads him into this glory. He says, look up at the stars. Count them if you can. And that's how many children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren you're going to have. More than you can count. More than you can count. And this glorious moment is how it all began, and how God revealed himself and showed himself, but dragged Abraham even into this dark cloud, because that in the Bible is also the place where God is met many times in darkness. And probably that's where we meet God most profoundly. I mean, we do it in joy and singing and praising and praying. But boy, when darkness hits our life, illness or sadness or just a disarray of our lives, that's where we really, really have to be people of faith. And that's where we really have to be transformed by our faith. And that's what happens to Abraham today. We have to go to the gospel next because that's what happened next chronologically. Jesus was here before Paul wrote these letters. Okay, so skipping over the letter of Paul, and we go to this gospel story of the Transfiguration. It's in all the Gospels. Another moment of glory, an incredible moment, because they walk up the mountain with Jesus, the ordinary Jesus that they walked with, the great teacher, the Messiah, but in his humanness, he looked like them, talked like them, he was like them. And then this thing happened. This thing happened that suddenly Jesus was changed, transformed, transfigured right before their eyes. And it says his clothes became dazzling white. And they're just amazed looking at this. And then suddenly Moses and Elijah, and why Moses and Elijah? That's the law and the prophets. These are the two great figures of the Old Testament who represent the law and the prophets. And they're having this conversation, and Peter, I suppose this is the beginning of Peter's vocation to become the first of the 12. He speaks up right away. We should make a tent for the three of you. We should make this moment, capture this moment, build something that can hold on to this moment. And then suddenly the dark cloud comes again. And like it happens so often in Scriptures, covers them and totally startled, terrified. They didn't see God, but they heard the voice of God, which would be the next most terrifying thing rather than seeing him, just to hear his voice. And he says, interestingly, "This is my chosen son, listen to him." And then it all kind of vanishes. And they're looking at the ordinary Jesus again with Moses and Elijah out of the picture now. What happened? What happened to them? It's really hard to say. This story's quite glorious and even quite strange. But not only was Jesus transfigured before their eyes, they were transfigured because of what they saw. I like the opening prayer that speaks about God fixing our sight, helping our sight to really see. And I wonder sometimes if we really see God, and I'm not talking about a vision or even hearing a voice out loud, but seeing God in the ordinary things. For when they looked at Jesus again, they were challenged by God to listen to him, to hear his voice. And maybe that's the key. Maybe that's how we come to really see Jesus, is by listening to Jesus, listening to his voice, to his word, to his calls, to his modeling and exempling the gospel life that he was inviting all of us into. So when we look at the second reading in light of the gospel, which happened chronologically, say the year 30, well, Paul probably was writing these letters around the year 50 or 60, somewhere there. And he's talking to a community of faith that also had been transfigured by being reborn in their faith, reborn through their baptism. And he's noticing that some of them are beginning to turn away from it, to lose it, maybe to stop listening. And he challenges them to come back and get rid of the stuff that's blocking their really hearing and listening to the Lord in their lives. But this is the promise he gives them, a kind of another moment of glory. He says, our citizenship is in heaven. And what an extraordinary thing to say. We belong to heaven. Heaven belongs to us. We've been born into it, just like somebody who comes to this country and has a baby here. At least it's supposed to be this way still, but they're automatically a citizen. Just by the birthright. Well, our birthright or our rebirth right is our baptism. And it's declared by Paul that makes us citizens of heaven, citizens of God. How extraordinary. And then he says, Jesus Christ will change our lowly body to conform with his glorified body by the power that enables him also to bring all things into subjection to himself. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, whom I love and long for, my joy and my crown, in this way stand firm in the Lord. Now, as long as I can remember in my theological training, this was always considered looking at this before Jesus died, to have a moment of that glory that is the risen Lord. And that would happen before he would go to the cross. And I'm quite sure the apostles, the disciples, didn't have a clue what it meant. They didn't have a clue what it meant. That's why they wanted to build the 3 tents. They figured that was what they're supposed to do instead of just taking in this glory and being transformed by it. So I ask you, and I ask myself, do we experience that? Have we ever experienced it? I'm not talking about a voice or a vision, but an inner voice that is so clear that after hearing it, we see everything differently. After hearing it, we see everything differently. Because that's what the Transfiguration in this great feast is all about. To open our eyes, the inner eyes of our heart, to see God in his glory, and to realize and appreciate and be grateful for the fact that he invites us into a sharing of that glory in our lives.